Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Friday session. So if you are joining us on YouTube Live, thank you so much. If you are joining us on Facebook Live, thank you so much. If you're joining us on Zoom, thank you. If you're watching us on our Vimeo archive, thank you so much. We appreciate you being here as well. We will work dutifully and diligently to make this a good utilization of your time. I don't even know where to start today because this is going to be every bit of a dumpster fire that you could possibly ever muster up in a sales training environment. Today is kind of a unique session. Normally our sales training protocol is real direct. You can connect the dots, between one to the other and thread. Today is a VUCA session, which is the first time we're ever doing it. Really, it's kind of interesting that it coincided with just the chaos, which is the world right now. And John was kind enough to kind of put together a montage, a chronology of literally the last couple days as a lead-in to our session today. So, Mr. Wechter, would you like to start?
Sure. On this red tie day, VUCA, as you can see on the screen, is an acronym for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And the reason that this particular session today, the VUCA session as it's coming to be known as, is we've had a week that is just unbelievable in terms of everything when it comes to economics, life, politics, very sensitive stuff, very divisive stuff. And so I want to give you an idea of the backdrop. What we're going to be doing here is not a political statement. It's not meant to tick anybody off. Mm-hmm. It's not meant to make anybody happy. It's just a foundation for today's presentation, mm-hmm. and that is the crazy world that we are currently in. So just give me one little second here, and the next few minutes will be the things that have happened. It's Friday morning. All of this happened either late Tuesday, on Wednesday, Thursday, mm-hmm. Or even this morning. And so one of the things that happened a few hours ago, mm-hmm. the Supreme Court turns over Roe v. Wade, mm-hmm. and basically said it's up to the states, yep. which has been a 50-year battle. Good, bad, right, or wrong, that's right. for you to decide. Right. And but it's a sign of just VUCA. Everything that's complex, that's ambiguous, that's volatile. It's really an amazing situation. And yesterday, we had the concealed weapon come down from the Supreme Court. So this is, for the first two of these slides, are more the judicial side of the unclarity, if you will, of our world. And it's really kind of interesting because once you get through the courts, then you start looking at world politics, and all of a sudden we've got a war in Ukraine that the whole world is watching and giving all kinds of weird stuff doing, creating food shortages, mm-hmm. especially the real victim is going to be Africa when it comes to the food shortage. Yep. And so it's just another example of our crazy world. And for Mr. Don here, who has grandkids, there's a baby formula shortage. So how do you, it's just like, you can't write this type of script. You can't make this stuff up. But guess what? You have to sell in this environment. Yes. You have to run your business in this environment. Yes. And you have to live your life in this environment. So that's part of what this VUCA thing is all about. Continuing on, by the way, there's a chip shortage, as you know, and Toyota just announced they're going to reduce their production schedule by 50,000 vehicles. That's just the starter. They say that eventually there's going to be more to come, but on the flip side of that, the electric vehicle put out by Cadillac is basically booked solid now for the next 18, 19 months. They're not taking any more orders because mm-hmm. they don't have the production capacity mm-hmm. to increase it. Mm-hmm. So now we have a chip shortage. And what's the conundrum all about a chip shortage? Well, we need minerals. We need to be able to become independent and basically create create minerals from the ground in all around the world, including the United States, but the EPA won't really allow us to do that. These are just articles in the last couple of days. It was announced yesterday that the S&P 500, which has already taken a hell of a bath here in the first 6 months, could go down another 20%. Most financial people are just saying, now's not the time to start dollar cost averaging yet. Wait a few more months and then start dollar cost averaging because we've not hit the bottom yet.
Yep.
But that is really something out of Morgan Stanley. And our Federal Reserve has acknowledged that rate hikes are going to cause unemployment. And we're going to get into some specific examples here in a second. But the labor market is starting to unfreeze itself a little bit. I was just in several meetings with people that now when they place ads, whereas 4 or 5 months ago, they got 2 or 3 resumes maybe, now they're getting 8, 9, or 10. Now those are just small baby steps, but guess what? They're real, and we're starting to see, due to a lot of layoffs and a lot of people, because the welfare state is now coming to an end, they're getting off the couch saying, boy, I guess I'm just going to have to get some cash in again. So they're starting to resurface in the marketplace, whereas previously they were not. Interest rates are going up. This is a graph that basically says, okay, the people that were able to qualify for a home purchase, at 3%, 3.5%, those types of people, those borderline qualifiers, if you will, they are really out of luck, because now that the rate is a little over 6%, the median house at $400,000, 50 million people qualified at 3%, and now it's down to just under 30 million. So that is a huge percentage, and that's going to drive. We have a client that's in the mortgage business. Their phones are not ringing. They're losing. The people are not qualifying. Basically, a residential real estate broker that I know said he's got a condo on the market now for 2 weeks. He hasn't had anything on the market for 2 weeks in almost 2 years. And what happened was they thought they had it sold 2 days ago. It was a $200,000 condo, and the person could not qualify that signed the offer. So it went back onto the market, and so it's just really more of the same. Now, from an inflation standpoint, we've got here a graph that goes back quite a long time. It goes back to the Ronald Reagan era. And basically, if you take the 4 items that...
You're back right here for the Reagans. There.
Yeah, the spike.
Yep.
So basically, if you take the 4 items of utility costs, gasoline, food at home, and electricity, something that we all consume every day, the inflation rate back when Reagan took office was 27% for those 4 items. Today, it's 26% for those 4 items. And it's not the 8.5% or the 8.6% that we all read in the paper. These are the lifeblood items of so many millions and millions of people, and the inflation rate is 25%. We can't get that back. I mean, even when the rate goes back down to 2%, there's going to be a year and a half where those $5,000 every year are out the door, gone forever. And that's the power of inflation. Here locally, TEP increased prices around 8 to 9% last year. They've already gotten a 9% increase so far this year, and it just came up on Sunday's paper here locally that they're requesting another 12. So we're talking about electricity potentially going up almost 30% in less than a year. That's really, really significant. That's going to hurt an awful lot of folks. More VUCA.
It is.
And here's a combination of the mortgage industry that I was talking about, plus the layoff industry. JP Morgan is basically laying off hundreds of people. They're reassigning thousands more into different non-mortgage related departments, and that's just a drop in the bucket that's going to really increase our uncertainty and really enhance our need to survive in a VUCA world. United Airlines cutting 12% of the flights. I thought it was pretty interesting that the the head of transportation just met with the airlines in Washington, D.C. this week, and when he went to get on his flight to go to New York, the flight was canceled. So Mayor Pete was not happy.
Yeah, that probably wasn't by accident, by the way. If I was the CEO of that airlines.
And basically, for those who are really have been, they're part of a larger deal, they've got a nice 401k or a pension or something like that, those accounts are just taking a beating. They just really are. And of all the things that the world has created to help us wean ourselves off our tobacco, they created this vaping industry, and now the vaping industry is coming under scrutiny as adults try to stop smoking, but it's affecting the kids too. Netflix laying off 300 or more.
Yep. Tesla.
That's just coming up. Yep. And Tesla is also laying some people off. And finally, we're going to be going, this VUCA world that we're going to be living in is really going to be problematic for so many more businesses who have been bailed out, if you will, so long now. But after all of that stuff is coming to fruition, pandemic has changed the buying patterns of so many people, and retail is really going to suffer the next 2 years. So with that, I will turn it over to, I will turn that little cheery presentation over to Don. But again, it's the backdrop of where we're going to be having to conduct our business here going forward. So Don?
Enough of that cheery news, everybody. Which, by the way, the vast majority of those things, maybe not the Ukraine battle and war and such, but the vast majority of those things happened literally in the last 72 hours.
Yes.
And so there's a couple things I'm going to suggest. Get the Wall Street Journal. If you're, get it online, take a look at it. Right now, Wall Street is Main Street. And the things that are happening all throughout the world, there's nothing up on that screen that isn't going to affect you. And I don't care how old you are, how young you are, where you are, retired, doesn't make any difference. This is going to be a new world, even different and potentially even more damaging, not to be the voice of cheer, but even potentially more damaging than COVID that we just came off of. Because the belief was when COVID ended, there were many people that were just kind of hanging on by the skin of their teeth. The perception was COVID ends and we're going to go right back to where they were. So if I had a restaurant, my tables are going to be filled. If I have a movie theater, the people are going to rush back into my theater. If I have this, if I have a museum, everything. Once COVID is over, right? The switch was flipped. Yeah. We're going to be back to where we were, and that's not the case. And I'm looking for the people that are in any industry, though, that are very strategy-based, because you're now going to be even more important than you were previous. Because when there was nothing happening, there really wasn't much strategy needed. Now that there's this brave new world to face. So let's talk about the VUCA idea. And let me give you kind of a setup for this, because when it was shown to me, it was I don't want to say earth-shattering, because that seems very dramatic, but it was so different than what most people think. Because most people, when they think, they plan, they base it on basic information. So if you're in a business and you have a 1-year plan, 5-year plan, 10-year plan, whatever that plan is, you're going to be able to take that plan and you're going to instill on those certain basic principles, right? We're going to do this, we're going to do this, this is what we can expect. I remember my father telling me when I was a young man, buy real estate. They can never make any more. You can never lose money on real estate. I did in 2008 a lot. Why? Because in 2008 the housing bubble came. Yep. And the very thing that you can never lose money on, you know what a lot of people did? They lost money on it, right? And then people say, well, you can put your money in the stock market, right? You can always make money in the stock market, right? And you can make money in gold, and you can do this. I remember in the dot-com world, right, being told you can't lose money in technology ever. There's a ton of people that lost money in technology. When the dot-com pop, you look at what's been happening recently with cryptocurrency. You know, that's an entire industry completely built on faith. Mm-hmm. That's all it is. It's just faith. So now we're in an environment where the hard and fast rules that we have all followed in business, in life, in careers, mm-hmm. in finances, in investments, is now subject to enormous change. And in the VUCA program that we're going to talk about today, really started in the aftermath of 9/11. Right. So in the aftermath of 9/11, I think the whole world was kind of stunned, but at the same time, the whole world said, how could this possibly happen? How could you manage to get 2 airplanes and crews and people that know how to fly them and get them off in the air and get them coordinated and get them to smash into the World Trade Center? And how can all this happen? How is that even possible that there are so many moving parts that would all align to make some tragedy like that actually take place? And the Army War College, which for those that don't know what the War College is, it's really our military think tank. It's where the brightest minds in the military get together and think about the most incredibly bizarre circumstances, right? If this happens here, how does this affect this? And when this happens at this part of the world, how does this affect here? Because now they're being forced to look at the world through a very different set of eyes. Because now the hard and fast rules that we had in the past aren't holding that way anymore. So they came up with a variety of principles, which we're just going to kind of acronym ourselves here to VUCA, V-U-C-A. The V stands, and I'll put them down there, and then we'll kind of break them out individually, and I'll show you how I want you to overlay this concept against the decisions you're going to be making now. Because interestingly enough, in sales, we're expected to make sales regardless of the circumstance. If you went to your boss and said, you know what, boss, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, I'm not going to make any sales this month. I still want you to pay me. I'm just not going to make any sales this month. What do you think is going to happen? Right? If you're in sales, how many salespeople stayed home during the pandemic? Most of those, regardless of the circumstances, they were out there doing the best they could. And as soon as the gates were loosed, they couldn't wait to rush out the door. When the rest of the world was still trying to dig themselves into staying home, the salespeople in the world couldn't wait to get out. So let's look at the V, which stands for volatility. Volatility. Did I spell that right?
No.
No, I didn't. It has an A. Volatility. That says volatility. I'm not sure what I actually wrote, but I want you to write on your notes volatility. For those that don't know what volatility is, I mean, do you want to give them the Webster Dictionary version of it?
Well, it's a variety. It's a different, depending on the industry you're in. So, for instance, volatility in the stock market is a measurable tool. It's called the VIX, the VIX. It's the volatility index. Mm-hmm. And so, and it's, by the way, it's up in areas right now. But volatility is just, our just own internal measure of everything that is changing on the fly, unpredictably.
Volatility. Uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That now becomes the new model, because everything that we've done in sales up to this point in time is likely going to change. So for those that are looking, it's interesting, I came from the big three. I came from outside of Detroit. And it was interesting that the big three that at the time would have been General Motors, Ford's, and American Motors. That was kind of the time, American Motors being Chrysler, Dodge, those things. Now really there's kind of only the big two that are uniquely domestic, which is Ford and GM. Right. But it was interesting because I had so many family members and relationships and customers connected in that they would have 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 years, 15, 20, 30 year plans going out, and every aspect of that was scrutinized and looked at and tried to, people that were futurists and were like, this is what the world's going to look like in 10 years. And they really followed those plans infinitum. And the interesting thing that I find, right when everything was happening in COVID and we were having conversations, almost uniformly throughout the world, here's what I'm hearing. We just want to get through this year. We just want to get through. All the plans we had, all that was thrown away. We just want to get through this year. Now, if you think of just the things that happened in the last 72 hours that John had up on the screen, these were the types of things you wouldn't find in an entire year. Right? A war that would encompass the world. that's likely, it's going on now, and it's likely that will literally bring us, as some people believe, to the brink of war with people that maybe don't have the same value of human life that we do. Right? Not making a political statement, but if you look at past history, I don't think that that's too far of a stretch. So volatility, we live in a very volatile environment, even when promises are made. In fact, you mentioned the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal had an article not too long ago that says a lot of the offers that were made to people are now being rescinded.
Right.
So there were offers that people made to hire you, right? They'd say, yeah, we want you to start in a month, want you to start in 2 months. You went in, you went ahead, you put your things out, you quit your job, and now you get a letter from HR that says, market conditions have changed, we no longer need that position. Sorry, good luck. And because you signed, at the bottom line of your application, it says if they rescind the offer, you're okay with that. Buried in the, zero size font that you never read. It is what it is. So we live in a very volatile world. So the client base that you have, don't assume first and foremost that the customers you have are going to be your customers tomorrow. I want you to make a blanket statement in your mind and say, what would happen if every single client that you had, prospect that you had, or somebody you were working with now ceases to exist? What would your business do? I'll give you a wonderful example. One of the relationships, being a musician my entire life, I had a wonderful relationship with a very, very high-end wedding band in Michigan. One of my first business was a chain of music stores. And they were clients of mine literally in the mid-'80s, and I've maintained a relationship with them, just friendly through that period of time. So this is a wedding band that would routinely charge $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. It's an 8-person band, and they were amazing, absolutely amazing. Their business ended immediately in 2020, right? In and around March of 2020. Because at that point in time, what were people not having? Weddings. Certainly not big weddings of any kind. So now if you're the premier wedding band in an environment where no one is having weddings, your entire market just ended just like that. Yeah. And we worked through them and tried to figure out ways, and we came up with some great, very creative ways in order for them to maintain an income. But even now, to this very point, they had thought when the switch got flipped, they would then go back. So volatility is going to be a critical element. How about uncertainty? Most people don't know what they don't know. It's the devil you don't know as opposed to the devil you do know. Most people there's a great line that I love to use. Sitting on their biscuit, not wanting to risk it. Yeah. Now there are people that will not do the very things they know they should be doing because they don't know what tomorrow is going to hold, even though we always talk to people that you think in terms of the president, right? You can't change the past. There's no guarantee of it tomorrow. You have to work with regard to the present. So now you have uncertainty. So now the people that were already tenuous about making a purchase, right? Looking at a new house, looking at a new car. Now they've got all these additional impediments on top of that where maybe they can't find the house they want or they can't afford it because now interest rates are higher. Or maybe they're concerned about their job because they're one of the people that are likely going to fall into the questionable categories of whether or not they're going to stay gainfully employed. Uncertainty. Complexity. There are so many moving parts out there in all of these. It isn't a black and white. There isn't any one of these issues, right? You have half the world that believes one way, and there's a lot of reason why they should, and they might even be right. Then you get the other half of the world thinks the other way, and they may be right too. How do you handle that? How do you handle the complexity of all the moving parts? You have a business. You're trying to create a business. You're selling a product. You're selling a service. And now you have all of these other moving parts that you never had before, and now you have to deal with this Wall Street comes to Main Street type of ideology where the person sitting at their house in Indiana now is affected by the things that historically only affect the largest of the companies out there in the world. Energy production, gasoline, retirements, all the things that are now coming into place. And the last one is ambiguity. The ambiguity idea is that there's all kinds of, again, although there's a lack of perfection in the world, there's all this complexity, but at the same time, the complexity itself is muddy. There isn't a very clear way to look at anything. There isn't okay, this is the way that it is, or this is the way that it is. So even now as you're making decisions, these decisions you're making through this, again, this cloud of ambiguity. So when the War College came out with the idea, this VUCA concept, they went to all branches of the military and said, from now on, regardless of what you do, any plan that you have is critically important for you to put through this filter. What happens if the most unbelievable thing happens? How would you react in that situation? And it's interesting because my son-in-law is actually a pilot for the Air Force. And although what they use in their debriefs and their things prior to taking missions isn't necessarily goes by the name of VUCA, they have their own acronyms that they follow, is essentially this. What if everything goes bad? What if we take off our plane and we're expecting to go here and that place isn't there anymore? What happens if we go to fly into an airport where all the power's out? What if we go to fly into an airport and we find out that there's something damaged, we can't come in? Or what if all the information we get is wrong? Or what if there's a problem with the and he was telling me all these amazing things that I would guarantee people never thought of before. And yet, now we have to think of those always. So I'm never going to give you something without at least giving you some kinds of tools in order to work yourself against it. So I want you to write down the VUCA. I want you to write down this. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Now let's talk about some of the solutions, some of the ways that you might be able to. Now I mentioned something earlier about reading the room, okay? Read the room. Read the room. So John, do you want to give him a nice explanation of read the room?
Well,
you'll be able to do it better than me.
Well, reading the room is, you have to be out in the world, and you have to keep your head on a swivel. You have to always understand that there's going to be certain things going on in the world or in the room, and you always like to use the circular room aspect.
Absolutely.
Whereas if you keep yourself mentally and tactically and strategically in a circular room, you'll never be able to paint yourself into a corner, and that's going to be very, very important in a VUCA world.
Sure. So I want you to be aware, I want you to ascertain the problems that could make your relationship go south and determine what they might be. So in a selling situation, what are some of the very high-line things? So if I'm going to read the room, what are some of the things that I might want to read in the room? And I'm going to encourage those that are taking notes, I want you to write this down. Well, I believe it's always money. I think money is always going to be a big issue. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's why budget is such a critical aspect of it. Now, because that's going to kill your deal more than anything. Most of the things when you look at the Wall Street Journal, the things that are causing all this volatility and uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, all somehow relate to dollars. Right? Now, you may not have any money in the S&P, so when it goes down 20%, that's no big deal for you. Even if it goes down another 20%, that's no big deal for you. Realize only a very small fraction of the people in the United States actually buy stocks and bonds. Right. A very, very small fraction. In fact, it's interesting. We've all heard the adage that says most people have less than $1,000 in cash when they retire. Now, that's a story for another day because that's a devastating thought to start with. But even though you may have no money in the stock market nor any money in the S&P, when it goes down, you feel less rich. If the stock market tumbles, even though you yourself may not be having any negative implication about the money lost, you now feel less rich. You now feel less confident. You feel more vulnerable because the people you do rely on are the people that may in fact have been affected by that. Right? If you're looking for a bonus, you're looking for a raise, or you're looking to keep your job. The reason those people are getting broomed at Netflix isn't because they're having a banner year. Right? Netflix is actively looking for a partner right now to get into the streaming business because they know they can't survive in the business they're in right now. There's too much accessibility to their product across the spectrum that they don't control. So it's going to be money. Read the room on money. What else? If you're reading the room on money, what are other things that could have a volatile effect on you?
You got to be dealing with the decision maker.
Players, exactly. Not surprising, you're going to see this is going to mirror our qualifying process. So you're reading the room, you got to have a handle on money, you got to have a handle on players, right? Who's involved? Where are they? If we know that the economy is going to be just a crush to the employment market, I'm going to strongly encourage you to expand your connections beyond just the one or two people that you have. I always say go above and below, because the below person is going to take that person's job when they get broomed. And if your guy gets broomed, it's likely his boss is going to be there at least a little bit longer.
Right.
So if you're reading the room, you're concerned about volatility, and if you're not, you need to be. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Reading the room, money, and the players. And then the last and final thing is going to be the reason. And now the reason is more important than anything. Because if you're in a business that really focuses on improvements, enhancements, increases, those kinds of things, you're going to struggle. You're really going to struggle. That doesn't mean that you can't make money. Much like we talked about in COVID, you may have to work twice as hard to get what you have right now. So it is doable, but it just may take more time than what it did before. So I'm going to want to make sure that you invest your time in reading the room. Money, players, and reason. Every job that you have, every client that you have right now, I absolutely encourage you to sit down with a piece of paper and pencil. Especially the ones that represent significant amounts of your income. So if you've got a client that's 30% of your income, the loss of that one client alone would be devastating for you. Right? I want you to look and say, well, what would happen if you lost all of that business? What would your business look like? Right? What if we're uncertain? We don't know if tomorrow we're going to have the business because they're dealing with their pressures. So you're going to want to have meaningful conversations with the people there, with the players, and say, Bob, how do you see our role in the future, taking into consideration the pressures your company is now going to have? And he can say something like, you know, Don, all bets are off. I don't know if we're going to work with you tomorrow. Don't know? Well, when do you want to know that? At least at a time when you can prepare for it or when it comes absolutely unexpectedly. Every one of your clients, every one of your prospects. The other thing is everything is in a shorter period of time. I remember there was a period of time when if you were building a house, you might give somebody a 6-month leeway on that. Yep. Right? You're giving a quote, they're interested in buying a house, and you say, well, you know, I can hold the price on this house till the summer. Nowadays, look at what's happened just in the world right now. That 25% increase, that's not random. That's real. We all see it. You know, I remember $1.90 for gas when I paid $4.90 today. You know, the price of milk, the price of eggs, that I just bought fabulous ones, by the way, have to pitch that, right? But the idea ultimately is that these things are things that you have to be cogent of. You have to read the room. Don't assume that much like the ostrich where you stick your head in the sand. No, these things will come to slap you. No one is immune. You will get hit with this. So you have to start now. If you have any questions of what that looks like, reach out to John and I. You know, we'd be more than happy to offer some suggestions, but I'm encouraging every single one of us. Number one, you got to read the room. You have to have meaningful conversations about the money, the players, and the reason. You have to do that. Now, by the way, there's no guarantee that even what you hear today is going to be viable tomorrow, but it will help you in that. Number two, don't act until things are clear. Don't act until things are clear. Now, that doesn't mean you don't prepare for the volatility. There's a great line in business, right? You hope for the best, but you expect the worst. You go back to the military, right? They manufacture all of these nuclear weapons not with the hope of ever using them. I like to believe they manufacture them with the hope of what? Not exactly, never using them, right? We just had a thing about the concealed carry law, right? Whereas the state of New York said you had to have a reason, which ran absolutely contrary to the Constitution, which says, no, you just have to feel like you want to. Now, anyone who's ever carried a firearm for 1 second of their life, you know what they hope more than anything? You never have to use it, right? It's you know, the person in the military, that's the person that wears the burden of war. The last person that wants a war is a person who's in the military who knows that they're going to be involved, that they're putting their life on the line. So, it's got to be clear. Now, if you think of in the COVID world, and again, we've got great examples just recently, how many people overreacted to things? Now, there's a difference between overreacting and using prudent judgment. But there was a situation where the world tried to one-up the next person, right? One person said, wear a mask, which probably makes sense, right? If you don't know what the hell's going on, fine, put on the mask, right? How could it hurt? But then the next person said what? Put on 2 masks. Why? Because if one's good, 2 is better. And then the next person says what? Put on 2 masks and a face shield, and goggles, and glasses, and put on rubber gloves, and use gallons and gallons of. Now, I'm not saying at that time All of that might have been very prudent because we didn't know what we didn't know. But there did reach a point where much of what happened in the world was just reactionary. To this very day, there are people that are still operating. And I'm not saying, again, I'm not making a judgment. All I'm saying is that there's evidence that we have now that we didn't have then, that maybe some of these actions might be extreme based on the evidence that generally is supported by everyone. So it has to be clear. If you're going to act, it has to be clear. Many people, especially in business, certainly in sales, we in our mind believe something that this makes sense, and yet, in the light of day, it doesn't. Right? The example I love to go back to, which is the tragic failure of all trade, was the new Coke philosophy. Right? Back in the 80s, as Pepsi was inching up on Coke in terms of the utilization, the margin grew smaller and smaller of Coke's dominance in the soft drink business. And instead of keeping the product that everyone loved, they decided by some giant brain, let's get rid of the thing that everybody loves, which makes us number one, and now change it. And I think that that's probably gone down as one of the most tragic marketing failures ever. And then within weeks, the old formula was released as Classic Coke. Ultimately, that well took over the new Coke, and then they abandoned all of that for the tragic failure that it was. There's a difference between acting and being acted upon, but in our VUCA world, your actions have to be clear. You have to make sure that you're operating on something that is legitimate, right? If you've got a situation where, right now, uniformly, everyone wants to raise their pricing. And I'm not saying that we don't have incredible pressures on us. That's very clear. I think if you have trucks and you have deliveries and you have those kind of things, you're going to be more uniquely sensitive, obviously, to gasoline and such like that. Now, there are other industries that don't have that sensitivity. Maybe they're not based in trucks, and maybe they don't do a lot of shipping. Maybe it's more of a paper move, right? And, life insurance agents, something like that. And yet, nowadays, across the board, everyone's rushing to do things that maybe the circumstances don't necessarily guarantee that are critical. Now, again, that doesn't mean that we're going to sit idly by. No, that doesn't mean we're going to sit idly by at all. But what it does mean is that I want you to be cognizant of the fact that if it's clear, it'll become very obvious, right? Any examples of clear, John, you want to throw out there?
Well, yeah. Also, the point I also want to make is in a VUCA world, clarity may be difficult to find. There won't be.
Of course
there
not.
won't be one.
It's uncertainty. Sure, it's complex.
There won't be one proven direct path to clarity.
Absolutely.
So if you're an objective decision maker, your go-to criteria is more data related or black and white evidence related in the law sense. You may have to cross over that midpoint and go to some sort of qualitative type of to enhance your clarity.
Sure. Well, you're almost guaranteed to have to. By virtue of this, imagine again, think of it as applying this into a military situation, right? You've got a mission, a training mission, something that's generally innocuous, not that detailed. And now you're forced to look at every possible scenario, and we've heard, tragically, by the way, loss of life in the military for training missions on scenarios that we couldn't have possibly ever imagined. I remember when the basketball player that died 2 years ago with his daughter, Kobe Bryant, right? Here was a scenario. How could you even have thought this is a possibility, right? It was a clear day with an experienced pilot, with a celebrity crew, celebrity people joining him, which means he's probably going to be on his best behavior. How could this happen, right? Smart people, the Titanic. How could all these things happen? And yet they do. And now in our world, because now everything is etched up. If you are self-employed, especially in a selling world where you eat what you kill, you have to be cogent of this. The demands are going to be unlike, in my opinion, anything that you've seen in the past. But it has to be clear. You're reading the room and your actions have to be clear. You raise your price when there is no choice. You do something when your clients are clamoring for it. Write that down. Clamoring for it. Your people will tell you, your prospects and customers will tell you what they want. Don't assume you know what they want unless you've surveyed them or, God forbid, actually asked them. But you have to be clear and you're looking for things that they're clamoring for. So when you think of it and being clear, I'm going to give you just kind of a quick dictation on that. The circumstances change, therefore responses change. So that was taken right out of our COVID sessions that we did. Circumstances change, responses change. Let me give you an example, right? And the one that I love to use is toilet paper and paper towels, something that everybody uses. And by the way, during COVID, no one was immune to it. So and there were times right in the midst of COVID where, people were lining up at 5 and 6 o'clock. And my dad, Don Zavis Sr., right, goes down to his local Farmer Jack's back in Michigan at 5 o'clock in the morning. Now, that's not hard for him because he's up at 5 o'clock in the morning anyways. But they had a deal where if you were a senior citizen, you were allowed to shop from 5 to 6 o'clock before they would open the store for everyone else. And my father and every other senior were there. And they were only allowed to buy, I think it was 2 rolls of paper towel and 6 rolls of toilet paper. Now, it's just my dad and my mom. He was there every day for a week buying his minimum 6 rolls. At the end of his week, he had just in his over 40 rolls of toilet paper at buying 6 at a time through the course of the totality of the week, weekends included. And now at that time, right, whatever the price of toilet paper was, but if you had a toilet paper and you were in the parking lot and you had a giant sign that said $1 a roll, even though you could buy a dozen rolls for $6, if you had a sign that says $1 a roll, you'd have a line of people to buy your $1 a roll. Now, because it's relatively back normal, that's unheard of. Circumstances change, responses change.
Now it's baby formula.
Now it's baby formula. Sure, people were paying more, but now it's gasoline, right? It's interesting that the gasoline part of it that's absolutely wiped out was any of the things. Everybody's buying the least grade of the gasoline. All of the higher ethanols and all the other higher grades of gasoline are basically gone at this point in time in lieu of the least expensive option on the gasoline. So circumstances change, responses change. Now that we have this inching up slowly but surely of interest rates, we know it's going to have a derogatory effect on the housing market. Mm-hmm. Clearly, it's going to have a derogatory effect on the banking market. It's going to have a derogatory effect on the mortgage business, which by de facto now includes what other things? Well, appliances. Mm-hmm. New home ownership historically have an incredible bearing on appliances. Landscaping, paint, remodeling, renovations, all of these things are so uniquely connected with flooring, with home and home ownership. So the people that think that they're immune from this VUCA scenario are absolutely not. They are absolutely going to be involved. So number 1, read the room. Make sure you have a handle on the money, the players, and the reason. Don't assume that if somebody's been with you, I don't care how loyal you're convinced that they are, they may not be able to be through no choice of their own. Number 2, it has to be clear, right? Circumstances change, responses change. Don't act unless it is clear. Number 3, I want you to listen twice as much as you do now. I'm going to put times 2. Now, we often say what? You should be listening 30% of your time, where your clients are going to be speaking 70% of your time. In this situation, I believe you're going to have to listen even more. You're going to have to now listen, certainly not only to what they say, which we always did, but now more than ever, what they don't say. The things that you don't hear, I believe, are going to be the things that are going to be the most critical. Whereas in the past, people were looking for 2 and 3 and 4-year contracts so that they would buy products and services for a set amount that they can budget from. That's not going to be the case now. I don't believe that you're going to have that consistency. You're not going to have the obligatory relationship of a client buying from you or necessarily you selling to them only. Why? Because circumstances change, scenarios change. So when you're thinking that listen twice as much, I want you to not only listen to your clients, which you should already be doing, but what other things? Well, listen to me in some cases includes reading. Read, right? Again, Main Street comes down, Wall Street comes down to Main Street. You want to be reading everything. Listen to all the pundits, everybody that has an opinion. You may not necessarily agree with them, but they may have words of wisdom. Your clients, and the best way to understand your clients and to listen to them is give them a reason to talk, give them a circumstance. Some of the things that we're talking about nowadays are surveys. Survey is a great way to get information. You know, it's interesting nowadays, it seems like you can't do anything without getting a text a few minutes over. You know, you talk to Bonnie at AT&T. You know, how would you rate her, 1 through 10?
Yep.
Everyone wants to know. That feedback is going to be critical because that feedback gives them instantly. Most people believe out of sight, out of mind, right? I would never ask my client what we're doing wrong because I believe that if I bring something up, it's going to be bad. No, it's just the opposite. If something's going south, it's better that you do know about it than you not know about it. And that's why you're listening twice as much as you did before. Now, again, I'm using that 30 and 70% as still as a gauge. Now, should it be more? I would be okay with it being more.
Sure.
Right? But it's more in a scenario where you've got to give them a reason. Surveys, number one. You can do surveys. Anybody can. It doesn't have to be War and Peace. It could be something as simple as just 2 or 3 questions on a simple email asking them for an ABC, a 1 through 10, a one-word response, something like that. And by the way, if you're in a position where you can offer that service to your clients, this is a perfect opportunity to do it. If you go to your client and say, Mrs. Jones, have you been taking surveys? You should. This is a service my company provides. And we'll help you ask the right questions. Why? Because if you want better answers, you ask better questions. And most people do a very poor job in crafting the critical questions they want. So a survey is one of them. How about a focus group? Focus group is another great one. Put 3 or 4 people, 5 people, 10 people who are in the very industry that support and ask them the questions. Let them give you the feedback. Don't assume that you know what they want. Look at everything that everybody did wrong and now how the follow-up was. You know, I love to use the idea of DoorDash, a lot of these food delivery services. And I think Uber Eats did a masterful job because they were able to pivot from moving people to moving stuff. Right. So you could get food and toilet paper and all the stuff you didn't want and the Instacarts. And by the way, those had been around for years. DoorDash had been around for years, only got minimal acceptance because people were like, well, why am I going to pay somebody to go pick up my McDonald's? It's right in the corner. I'll go get it myself. And now, unfortunately, even though they had great acclaim for the last 2 years, what's happened to them recently? They've pittered out. Why? Because people are now back into the swing of going to get themselves. They're going to have to pivot again to something new, or they're going to risk the economic Darwinism that is likely going to fall victim to most of the retailers, by the way, that are not going to be around in a year. I think you're going to see that rash of bankruptcies and you know, everything from Revlon that did it 2 days ago to, and I think you're going to see some big ones that come down the pike as their last gasp to try to survive. I mean,
10 years from now, there's going to be all those cars will be driverless.
If that's the case, well, you even mentioned about GM and the electric Cadillacs. Do you realize, by the way, that all of those electric Cadillacs, very few are actually going to the consumer? Right. Most of those are actually going to the big companies. They're going to, you know, they're going to go to the enterprise and they're going to go to the Hertz and they're going to go to the fleets because they want a virtue signal that that's very important in the world. Now, here's what's going to happen. Because of the cost associated with the operation of those vehicles and the difficulty doing it, right now we haven't geared up to have an electric charging station in every corner. So now you're going to have to go through this machination of saying, if I'm going to go 100 miles, now I have to figure out where I'm going to be able to charge. And now that charge, to get the full charge, unless you can do it in 5 minutes while I'm in Starbucks, that's going to be a problem. If you tell me I can't go anywhere for 2 hours while I'm charging up. So, I mean, that's a story for another day. But again, you're dealing with all this volatility and uncertainty. Now the marketplace is forcing you in a direction that at present time, it can't necessarily support. Listen, surveys, focus groups, send out emails. You know, more than anything, here's what I like, personal calls. Make calls, phone, the actual phone. Reach out to these people and give them this information because although they may not see here these words, they may not even understand the VUCA or the War College connection to it. They understand volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity because they're fighting with it right now. Every time you turn around, there's some new group that's battling another group on some things that are true, but some things are completely made up. And yet they have an enormous, when Disney decided to go to war with the state of Florida, right? Nobody could have picked that out. Everybody loves Disney. Who would ever think that there would be some section of the population that didn't immediately side with Disney? And yet, there were. And yet, their stock took a hit, and yet it hasn't fully recovered. About something that had nothing to do with theme parks and movies.
Nothing.
Why? All of these reasons. Now, it's not enough to make a good product or service. You have to have the right morality. You have to have the right social media. You have to have the right positioning, all of which are outside the control of the vast majority of the people that are there. So number 3 is going to be listen twice as much as you did before. Have your what ifs. This is probably, if I had to pick the ones that are the most important, this is the number one that's most important. I'll put a big star in here. If you're not playing what if, you should be. And by the way, they're encouraging the what ifs to be the absolute worst case scenario. Because if you would have said what if, right, played what if in the world of the World Trade Center bombing, and you were playing what if and said, what would be the worst thing that could happen in a terrorist threat? What do you think somebody would have said? Hit the Capitol, right? Hit the White House. Okay. They would have said, hit the Pentagon. Oh, that would have made sense, right? If you really, really, really wanted to hit America at its heart after the Capitol and after the Pentagon and after the White House, where would you go? I got to imagine the Twin Towers would have been somewhere on somebody's short list in that top 10.
Absolutely.
If you really wanted to strike at the heart of America, and that's why when this came out and War College jumped in, and that's the way they're looking, because the conversation they're having is, if the water supply was going to be poisoned, where would be the worst place? If the electrical grid would go out, now I had the experience years ago in Michigan, and the Northeast, by the way, had their electrical grid go out for a quarter of the country for 3 days. Now, other parts of the United States didn't know that, but if you lived in the Midwest or the East, you had no problem. The entire electrical grid was out for that entire area. That what-if scenario. Now, think of it in the business world. Say, for example, you sell life insurance, right? What if you decided, what if your entire life insurance, now people had no extra money. Now, although I think life insurance is a critical element, absolutely a necessity as part of your family budget. But what if your budget was so strained because of $5 gas and 25% increase in the cost of your food, that now the entire market decided that life insurance wasn't important? What do life insurance companies do? I don't know. These life insurance companies, by the way, are also responsible for trillions of dollars of annuities. Complexity. Now it's not just losing life insurance, now they can't support the annuities that they have because they've invested in things that are not giving them any response. These things are all very tightly weaved together, but whatever business you're in, whatever market you're in, whatever world you're in, you have to be playing what if. And the interesting thing about it is it's not anything. It goes from younger people in their teens to people that are convinced. I hear people say all the time, well, you know what? None of this stuff bothers me. I'm retired. None of this stuff bothers me. I'm retired. Really? You don't buy food? You don't drive? Maybe you don't drive a lot if you're retired, but you do buy food. How about medicine? You know, your belief that, you know, you're going to have Medicare is going to be there in perpetuity and it's never going to go up, that health care, all the things you believe that are going to take place and they're all going to be perfect? No. Who knows what's going to happen? Again, go to COVID, right? Think about all the people that were in nursing homes and assisted care facilities that went there because they believed that the quality of care would be better, only to find out they were held prisoner and ultimately it led to their untimely death. Now, again, I'm not making a political statement. I think that evidence is irrefutable. And no one could have seen that coming. In your business right now, I'm suggesting at least 10 what-ifs. And I would like you to get the number one what-if, the worst, right? 10. So say, for example, if you're playing what-if and you were a professional athlete, what would their number one what-if be?
Injury.
Sure. What if I can't be a professional athlete anymore? Right? The person that's making $5 million on the football field, next year they're making nothing because they're injured. Their contracts are written in such a way nowadays that they aren't going to pay you, right? If you're out, when you're out, you're out. You're paid for the value that you bring. That's their what if. Now, if you were a professional athlete and you weren't playing what if with that regard, what if you had a business, successful though it may be, that ceased to exist anymore? Any recent businesses aren't around anymore, right? Some big names that have merged, ceased to be in business, right? Go back to 2008 and you look at some of the biggest players on Wall Street that just went like that. They just evaporated, right? How many names are not even around anymore? American Motors doesn't even exist anymore. Now it's a conglomeration of multinational, international companies that are manufacturing Dodge and Chrysler. Not even American companies, unfortunately.
Enron.
Yeah. Enron, another great example, right? You look at all the things that are in the world that people were absolutely convinced would be around forever in perpetuity. They don't exist any longer. They're now morphed into some other element. So number 4 is going to be what if. I'm going to suggest you do in sales the 10 what ifs, right? What if your market dried up in its entirety? Right? Now you may have to have an exit plan for yourself. Maybe being in that market is no longer, if nobody's buying life insurance, what are you going to do? Do you sit by the side of the road with a cup in your hand hoping something's going to happen? No, you better have a plan B or an option 2 that takes in consideration what the circumstances are. Now, here's the thing. There's still people buying life insurance. There might be less people buying life insurance, and there may be less people maintaining their life insurance, but there will still be people buying life insurance and maintaining that life insurance, and that's where market share comes in, connected with what if. And I often say, and I've said this related to COVID as well, you may have to work twice as hard to get the same results you got previously. So if you were making 10 prospecting calls before, you may have to make 20 prospecting calls. If you're going to one networking group, you might have to go to 2. If you're having one coffee with your clients once a week, you may have to do it twice. Why? You may have to work twice as hard. You want to prepare for that when it's preparable. It's that act versus being acted upon. What you don't want is a situation where everything is pulled out from underneath you and you have nothing more that you should be doing. Next thing is you want to have a team. When things go south, many hands make light work. You want to have a team. Now, even when you have people, and I love to use the solopreneurs, right? The individual entrepreneurs, things like that. Even those people have a team. It may be different. Every business has the same thing. Whether you're Ford Motor Company or you're Bob's Plumbing, you have a marketing department. At Bob's Plumbing, it's probably Bob. You have a sales department. At Bob's Plumbing, it's probably Bob. You have an accounts receivable department. Again, Bob. You have an accounts payable department. By the way, that's Bob too. You have all the aspects of the largest of the companies, and yet in a solopreneur situation, you are everything. You need to have people around you that can help support those things that you're going to need. Now, will it cost money? Probably. Probably. Rarely do I know of anything of value that has no cost to it. And that's why so many people get sideswiped, because it's that sitting on your biscuit, not wanting to risk it. And that's what creates that doom loop. And I love to use that in advertising. Right? You hit a particularly difficult spot in your business and money gets tight and you cut back on your advertising. And as a result of that, less people know about you. So you cut back even further because your sales have gone down. And then now less people know of you. And then you cut back further on your advertising, so now even less people. So you've got this downward spiral that goes down. Again, you want to be able to do that. There needs to be a team of people around you. All right, sometimes you can trade and barter for services, so there may be something that you can do that would be of interest to them and they can bring value. So it could be something as simple as social media, right? The world is online. We often say, and Simona hears this all the time, our videographer, if you don't exist in digital media, you don't exist. And we have an entire world of people that it's like they're going out of their way to keep themselves a secret. It's like they go nowhere, they do nothing, nobody knows anything about them, and not surprisingly, when you have the kinds of economic downturns that present itself in COVID, and a lot of the businesses, by the way, that never recovered from COVID, were ones that were already swirling the drain, right? COVID just helped accelerate that situation. I see a version of that coming up, and it's interesting, and not to get too heavily in the economics, but if you look at the legitimacy of economics, 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth is a recession. 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth recession. Every economist in the world, that is what everybody operates under. Now, we've already had that. Nobody's going to say that because as soon as you mention the R word, people are going to lose their mind. The problem being is that when the 3rd quarter finishes, there's going to be no way to hide it. What we find in a lot of cases is that rising tide raises all ships. When business is good, it's good for everybody. Right? When the industry is good and the stock market is raging and interest rates are low, you could be the worst real estate agent in the world. And yet you're still going to make sales, right? It's the idea of the blind squirrel gets a nut every now and then. However, when things go down and it gets more challenging, that uncovers a lot of the imposters. And that's what you saw, during COVID. A lot of the companies that struggle were the ones that already had internal structural problems organizationally and otherwise, and yet you're going to see a version of that again. So I want you to have a team. Who are the people that you need to have? You would want to have finance people, banking people, marketing people, sales people. You want to have as many people that you need to make your solopreneur situation that much more viable. Because as things tighten up, those will be more critical. You want to get your line of credit loan for $50,000, not when you need $50,000. You need your line of credit loan well before you need the $50,000. Because when you need it, you're never going to get it because they're not going to give it to you because they see you need it. All of the writing is on the wall for most banks and financial institutions. So we talk about reading the room, understanding the money, the players. We talk about having a clear understanding that even though this is happening, right, all this stuff is happening, you have to be clear. For example, until Russia actually breached the border of Ukraine, it wasn't a war. There's a lot of guys standing on both sides, puffing up their chest. It didn't become a war till when? Until Russia breaches the borders. So we as the United States really didn't get involved until that happened. So a lot of the things that we do are in preparation. You're hoping for the best, but you're expecting the worst. And the worst will likely come. It's almost like when you prepare for it, the bad stuff doesn't happen because you're ready, right? So you want to be able to kind of think in that regard. Again, listen twice as much. Surveys are good. Focus groups are up. God forbid, pick up the phone, right? God forbid, actually sit down over a cup of coffee. And I would encourage you to talk to your clients about this because this is what they're facing. How are they going to handle this on their end? Bob, how are you going to handle? If you're, Bob, I know that you do a lot with XYZ company, and I saw XYZ company in the Wall Street Journal that was laying off 5,000 people, right? If you're working with Netflix, you're scared. If you're working with Tesla, you're scared, right? If you're doing all of these things, legitimate though it may be, now you have reason to be concerned in a world of uncertainty, all right? What if you want to have 10? Pick 10 what ifs. What if all of these things happen? What if my car breaks right down today? Right? What if I have a $2,000 repair on my car? How am I going to handle that? Because inevitably what happens, your car never breaks down when you have lots of money. Right? It's like the car never breaks down when you have the factory warranty. The day after the factory warranty ends, the next thing you know, the damn thing is up on blocks. Finally, you have to have a team that's created and is supporting you. Let's keep going. Get input from everyone. Input from everyone. It was interesting. One of the things, if you like history, and I'm a fan of Civil War history, and I love the fact that Abraham Lincoln had a cabinet made up of people that hated him. Team of Rivals. It's a great book that was out there. Because you would think that you would want to have people in your company or in your cabinet or in your government that thought exactly like you were. They were yes man. Oh, Mr. Jones, that's the greatest idea. Oh my God, new Coke, CEO, you're brilliant, right? And you know that when this is all going south, they're like, I knew this was a bad idea, and yet we didn't. So the Team of Rivals concept on Lincoln's cabinet kept him grounded because they all had the voice of dissension opposite of what he thought. But it was a voice shared by an enormous section of the country. He wasn't just getting the yes men around him, he was getting the people that had dissenting views. That's why in this situation, when you have volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, you better get input from everybody. You're going to want to know input from everyone. That's why having the team around you is important. Contact your banker. Bob, what's Chase Bank thinking about all the stuff that's going on? Talk to the people that provide you with the insurance. If you've got a building that you're renting, let's talk to them about what they're doing and how they're doing it. Talk to your clients. Again, we do an entire section on trusted advisor. And so many people spend time at the bottom of the pyramid as a vendor, right? You want to move past the vendor, past the supplier, past the OEM strategic partner to be that trusted advisor so you have these kinds of very high-end conversations. Because if you're assuming your clients are going to tell you without asking, they're probably not. Most people don't like to air their dirty laundry. They will, however, if it's weighing heavily upon them and you are a willing ear. We call that conversational gravity. So you want to have input from everyone. Family, friends, spouses, neighbors, coworkers, subordinates, superiors, everyone. Everyone has an opinion, and the more opinions you have, the more that you can draw from. Why? Because who knows? The next person might, in fact, have the better mousetrap. Especially in a world that has all this. I guarantee there was somebody somewhere in some section of the government, the military, first responders that said, well, what would happen if a plane hit, right? The Twin Towers. There was a plane hit the Empire State Building. Hit. It was an accident. Actually hit the Empire State Building. But there was somebody somewhere that says, well, what if, right? You manage to sneak in a nuclear bomb in a suitcase. What if somebody poisoned the water? What if the electrical grid goes? What if, the Kremlin decides to try to cyber attack us in the worst possible scenario? There's somebody playing what if. If you're not playing what if to your company, you will do so to your detriment. And by the way, I will tell you that everything that's here is all stuff that we're actively doing right now. These are all things that we are already in the process of implementing, because as soon as this came out, as soon as I became aware of that, I am a product of the product. I train and coach exactly as I do for myself. Let's go ahead and let's get to some of the final ones so we can do the wrap up. The final one, you got to strengthen existing relationships. I'm going to use the word harden. Harden. You can substitute the word strengthen, but I like the word harden better. Because you're hearing harden in a lot of places nowadays, and it's used almost defensively, but offensively as well. In fact, you're hearing a lot of things because of the terrible school shootings we've had as of late. What you're hearing a lot in the common media is hardening the schools. Make it more difficult for people to get in. Make it, have choke points and checkpoints, and you're hardening the environment. You need to harden your business. So you need to make sure that you've got the commitment, written preferably, but verbally otherwise, from the people you do business with, that they have the means and they have the commitment to stick it out with you for some period of time. And I will tell you, if they say, I don't know or I'm not sure, what you should be hearing is no. If I'm not sure or I don't know, what you should be hearing is no. Assume that they're not going to be around. Whatever weight that you're putting on that relationship is going to go by the wayside. And if you look at, again, that's literally, with the exception of the war in Ukraine, literally the last 72 hours. Maybe the baby formulas ticked up a couple of weeks as well. But these are all things that happen immediately, and they're affecting everyone, right? You're going to see, you're probably going to see rioting in the streets today. Who the hell knows?
Highly possible.
Well, and the terrible thing is it's going to be very, very likely along with it. Now, what you can do in the hardening situation is you can force collaborations that you don't have. Right? So if you think about it, you look at, when the United Nations originally came out, the people that you had in those areas weren't necessarily friends. You had different independent countries, even though they were proximally related to one another, they didn't necessarily believe in all the same doctrine. You could potentially have, a pseudo-communist or socialist environment directly next to a democratic. I mean, if you look at where we are right now, we're bordered by two different types of ideologies, one to our north and one to our south. In terms of, now they can say they're republics, they can say they're democratic, they can say a lot of things. They're not the same as we are, even though they may use the same terminology. So when you look at the United Nations and the formation of a lot of these people weren't necessarily friends, but they had a common enemy. There was a reason that they got together. It's the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So the same thing that we're looking for, the same lifeline we're looking for, the same life preserver we're looking for, there's a whole world of other people that are out there looking for it too. So if you reach out to those people in your world and say, I will commit that I will blah, 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 blah to you, if you will commit that you will blah, 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 blah to me. And you forge those relationships, seemingly forced in some cases, but more times than not, it's that war of equals. It's the idea that you've got multiple people coming together. This is a different world, and I think you're seeing the tip of it right now. And I think what I'm hearing just from the feedback from the world is that The business world is getting more challenging. I don't hear a lot of people say, my sales are off the chart. I'm making more money than I ever did before. Even when a year ago that wasn't the case, as evidenced by the DoorDashes and the Uber Eats and all the online services, and it was a different world even a year or two ago than it is right now. Put it this way, there were times you couldn't find a mask, right? You couldn't find hand sanitizer, right? Now you can buy it by the gallon. You can get as many masks as you want. It's a different world, but you have to be prepared for it. The people that are prepared for it, I believe, will survive and thrive. I believe despite all of this, you will thrive if you understand it and you take the necessary steps to make sure that you harden and inoculate yourself against it. So, Mr. Wechter, I don't want to be the voice of doom. Give me something good.
I'll give you something good. The potential here on the right side of the easel pad here is really grounded in listening, as you mentioned. And increasing your listening does a couple of different things. Number one, it allows you to keep your eye on the real problem. We're problem solvers looking for problems to solve.
Absolutely.
And if you are engaged in listening, that in and of itself will allow the problem to not drift on you unknowingly.
Yep.
So, and that's when the problem drifts, that's when you lose sight of the ball, if you will.
Absolutely.
And so the team is really, really important because, you know, in a typical situation, a customer will talk differently to the customer service person versus the owner. They'll talk differently to the accounts payable, accounts receivable.
Yes.
They'll tell people things that they won't tell others.
Yes.
So not only do you have to create the team, you have to engage the team. You have to keep them talking to you because they are just they are a medium. They are a vehicle of information coming at you. So I mean, I think once you create that listening environment that is so important, that's just going to help you keep your eye on and not let the problem drift on you. Right.
And I'll go, another thing I'd like to add. If you are in the strategy business in any way, shape, or form, this will be your best time ever. Because we often say, people buy emotionally. They justify it intellectually, but they buy emotionally. And the pandemic, and this, and the circumstances, the economy, $5 gas, that unwittingly provided the emotions already for change, right? You know, you look at they're trying to do some new gun laws that are coming out and making some changes where, you know, a year ago that would have never happened. They would have never gotten any traction whatsoever. But because of recent terrible tragedies, now people are willing to look past those tragedies and say, okay, we've got to do something, right? Maybe we can't be as hard and fast as we were before. Let's maybe compromise a little bit. So if you're in the strategy business or you have a strategy bent to your business, so if you're a financial planner, you want to be talking to your clients and say, Bob, Patty, we need to meet this month. You know, I don't care if you've got $5,000, $1,000, or $10 million. We need to meet this month. All of this stuff is going to affect you, right? So if you think you want to retire in 2 years, we may not have to make some changes today. Because again, if we're in the S&P and it's gone down 20%, likely gone down, you talk about the 401ks, right? The 401ks took a giant hit over these last 6 months. Now, if you're 30 years old, it's no big deal. It's likely going to come back. If you're 55 years old or 60 years old, and your nest egg went from $1 million to 500,000, let's just say you feel that uniquely differently than someone else. So if you're in the strategy world right now, you absolutely positively need to have that message to your client. Number two, you have to have your own strategy. I encourage all my clients to invest somewhere between 15 minutes and a half hour on a daily basis in quiet strategy and reflection. Sit down with just a pad of paper and a pencil, an empty pad of paper and a pencil, and say, what did I learn from today? What did I see on the cover of the Wall Street Journal? How is this going to affect me? If gas goes up to $7 a gallon, which it might, what's going to happen? What if my biggest client bellies up on me? Not just doesn't do business with me, but sticks me with a $100,000 bill. How am I going to handle that? What if my bank decides they don't want to be in the loan business anymore? Wells Fargo did that just recently. They just decided we don't want to be in the personal loan business anymore, right? We're going to make these changes. right? You've got IRS pressures, the fact that they want to bring in 80 or 100,000 people. Do you think that they want to bring in 80 or 100,000 so they're going to process your refund quicker? Do you know that the people that they want to hire are not even involved in the refund part of it? They're in the collections part of it. Think about that. So now all the things that you were absolutely convinced weren't going to happen or could never happen, or, again, I use the global pandemic. If I told you 3 years ago that the entire world was going to shut down to a standstill, you'd be like, nope, never going to happen. There could never be anything happen. And yet it did. And it will do it again. It will likely happen again. So, John, any parting comments as we wrap up today's session? I don't want to leave on a doom and gloom. I believe that there's a thrive here.
Yeah.
Much like during the Depression when you had millionaires made, and you look at the world wars and how people thrived despite the horrors of the world. We're there right now. There is enormous opportunity for those that realize the opportunity exists. Bold. Be bold, right? Mighty forces will come to your aid. Be bold. Work twice as hard. Assume that the marketplace is there. It might be harder, but the marketplace is there. But those that just sit and wring their hands and say how terrible the world is, well, for them, it is. It's terrible. For those that are not, well, at least they got something.
You got to find your big tree and sit under it for a while.
Absolutely. And again, if you have any questions about that, you can always reach out to John or I. We're happy to answer those questions for you. And a lot of the things that we have, we've got programs and scripts and some structures that we can add that will help you identify a lot of these things. So keep in mind the VUCA concept. Everything that you're doing nowadays has to go through the filter of being uncertain, of being volatile, of being complex. The devil's in the details, but a lot of times, although it seems complex, it's really pretty obvious for those that are looking for the obvious. And don't assume because it's ambiguous that there isn't a great simple question. One of my parting comments would be some mechanisms we use in executive coaching where we talk about problems versus solutions and how they have an effect on your policy, which right now you've got to have policies for. You need to have that standard operating procedure just like the military. So if you're having a problem, you better be in the problem fixing mode. And the one thing I would like you to take away as a parting comment is you think of it like this. The problem distilled down to one sentence. Because if you can't distill the problem down to one sentence, you don't have the real problem. Over the solution, distill down to one sentence. Because if you can't distill the solution down to one sentence, you don't have the real solution. Now becomes your policy. And that's how we move forward. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. We know there's lots of things that are vying for your attention online and otherwise, and we believe that the contribution and commitment you're making to your sales education will come back to you many times over. So on behalf of my partner in crime, Mr. Wechter, I'm Don Zavis, National Sales Trainer and Sales Coach, International Keynote Speaker, and we wish you good selling. Bye-bye, everybody.